The cost of developing a new drug has been doubling every 9 years. This brutal economic reality, known as Eroom's Law, is the dark joke at the heart of the pharmaceutical industry. It's a perfect inverse of Moore's Law, which accurately predicted the exponential acceleration of computing power. While our chips got faster and our phones got smarter, the process of discovering a new medicine got slower, more expensive, and more prone to failure. For decades, this was simply accepted as the cost of doing business. But inside a sprawling Pfizer research campus in Connecticut, a small group of scientists began to wonder if they were looking at the problem all wrong. They weren't biochemists or pharmacologists. At least not primarily. They were data architects, machine learning engineers, and computational biologists. And they believed that the key to the future of medicine wasn't just in a petri dish, but in the vast, untapped oceans of data the company had been accumulating for over a century. The traditional method of finding a drug was a slow, linear march. It began with a hypothesis about a disease, often based on decades of academic research. Then came the hunt for a target, usually a protein that seemed to play a starring role in the disease's progression. Once a target was identified, the real grunt work began in massive laboratories. Robots would screen millions of chemical compounds, sloshing them together with the target protein in tiny wells. Hoping for a reaction, it was brute force science. A numbers game. You might screen 1 million compounds to find a few hundred hits, then spend years tweaking their chemical structures to make them safe and effective in animals, only to watch them fail in humans. It was a process defined by its enormous failure rate, which is why developing a single successful drug now costs over $2 billion. The data from all those failures, from all those millions of screens and failed clinical trials, was usually just archived and forgotten. It was considered worthless. But to the machine learning team, that graveyard data was the most valuable asset. Pfizer owned. The shift began quietly, almost experimentally. The early projects were modest in scope. Instead of trying to revolutionize the entire pipeline, the data scientists focused on specific, painful bottlenecks. One of the first was toxicity prediction. Every year, promising drug candidates would be abandoned because they turned out to be toxic to the liver or the heart, often discovered only after millions of dollars had been spent on development. The data scientists built a model. They fed it decades of historical data on compounds that had been tested and had failed. Because of toxicity, they showed the algorithm the chemical structures, the biological assay results, and the final, fatal verdicts. The model wasn't a chemist. It didn't understand chemistry in any human sense, but it learned to recognize the patterns, the subtle molecular fingerprints that preceded disaster. Soon, it could look at a new molecule, one that had never been synthesized, and predict its likelihood of causing liver damage with startling accuracy. For the first time, chemists could kill a bad idea on a computer screen. Before a single test tube was filled, the bottleneck didn't disappear, but it shifted. Scientists were no longer limited by the speed of their hands, but by the quality of their questions. The real breakthrough came when the team stopped thinking about data as a collection of separate files and started thinking about it as a continuous, interconnected web. For most of its history, Pfizer, like all big pharma, had operated in silos. The chemists had their databases of molecular structures. The biologists had their data on protein interactions. The geneticists had their maps of the human genome. The doctors had their patient records from clinical trials. These were separate kingdoms, each with its own language and its own gatekeepers. The machine learning platform being built was designed to tear down those walls, ingested everything it learned to translate. Between the language of chemistry and the language of genetics, it could look at a genetic mutation linked to a disease and ask, what existing drugs or what yet-to-be-synthesized molecules might counteract that mutation's effect. This was target discovery on a new plane. Instead of a scientist spending years in a lab to validate a single hypothesis, the algorithm could generate thousands of hypotheses overnight, each one grounded in a web of cross-reference data that no human brain could hold. This new capability wasn't just an efficiency gain. It was a philosophical shift. The old model of drug discovery was reductionist. It assumed that most diseases could be traced back to a single broken part, and if you could fix that one part, you could cure the disease. It was the one gene, one drug, one disease model. But biology doesn't work that way. The body is a system, a dense network of feedback loops and redundant pathways. A disease like rheumatoid arthritis or Alzheimer's isn't a single broken part. It's a system in chaos. Knocking out one protein often does nothing, because the system finds a way around it. The AI, by seeing the whole network at once, began to suggest different kinds of targets. It pointed not to the most obvious protein, but to the one that sat at a critical junction in the network, the one that, if modulated, would have a cascading, stabilizing effect across the entire system. It was thinking in systems, not in parts. A moment that proved the value of this approach to the entire world came in early 2020, when the genetic sequence of the novel coronavirus was published. It was like handing the blueprints of a hostile invader to every research lab on the planet. Pfizer's AI platform was already running. The virus had a crucial enzyme, a protease, that it needed to replicate. It was an attractive target. But finding a molecule that could block it, be swallowed as a pill, and be safe for humans was a task that would normally take years. The team went to work. They didn't start from scratch. They fed the structure of the viral protease into their models, which had already been trained on decades of data about how small molecules interact with similar enzymes. The AI searched through Pfizer's vast library of existing compounds, looking for anything that might fit. It wasn't a blind search. It was a guided exploration, with the algorithm ranking millions of possibilities based on predicted binding strength, predicted safety, and predicted ability to be absorbed by the human gut within weeks. They had a short list of candidates. The iterative loop between the virtual prediction and the wet lab was compressed from months to days. The chemists would synthesize a molecule, the AI suggested, test it against the live virus, and feed the results back into the model, which would learn and suggest an even better version for the next round. The result was Paxlovid. It wasn't discovered by magic, and it wasn't discovered by a machine alone. It was discovered by a partnership, a constant, rapid-fire conversation between human intuition and machine pattern recognition. The timeline from virus sequencing to a viable pill was under a year. It was the first time the world got to see, in real time, what AI-augmented drug discovery could do under extreme pressure. But the story doesn't end with a pandemic victory. The harder work is still happening now. Away from the headlines, it's the work of changing culture. Pfizer is a company of brilliant scientists who have spent their careers developing a deep, almost artistic intuition for their work. A medicinal chemist can look at a molecule and have a gut feeling about it, a sense that it's druggable or that it's ugly. Introducing a machine that says, ignore your gut, the data says this is better, is a recipe for friction. The early AI models were often treated with deep suspicion. When an algorithm proposed a novel molecule, the chemists would sometimes dismiss it because it violated a rule they had learned 20 years ago. The challenge for the AI team was to build trust. They had to make the machine explain itself. They built visualization tools so that when the AI suggested a target, a scientist could click on it and see the evidence. The genetic studies that linked it to the disease, the patient data that showed its expression levels, the chemical structures of known molecules that bound to it. The AI became a research assistant, not a replacement. It did the boring part, reading millions of papers, cross-referencing millions of data points so the scientist could do the interesting part, making the final creative leap. This partnership is now being applied to the hardest problems in medicine, in oncology. The old way was to treat all lung cancer patients with the same chemotherapy, a blunt instrument that worked for some and devastated others. Now, Pfizer's AI platforms are analyzing tumors at the single-cell level. They are learning to read the unique genetic signature of a patient's cancer, understanding not just what type of cancer it is, but what mutations are driving it and what weaknesses it might have. The goal is to match each patient with a drug that has the highest statistical probability of working for them. A future where medicine is truly personalized. In rare diseases, where the patient populations are too small to be profitable under the old model, AI is offering a different path. These diseases are often caused by a single, devastating genetic mutation. By analyzing the genetic data of a handful of patients and comparing it to massive biomedical databases, the algorithms can sometimes identify a common biological pathway that is disrupted, and sometimes that pathway can be targeted by an existing drug, one that was developed for a completely different condition. This is drug repurposing at scale, and it offers hope to thousands of patients with conditions that were once considered untreatable. Perhaps the most profound shift is happening in neuroscience. The human brain has always been the final frontier. Diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are maddeningly complex. The pathology begins decades before any symptoms appear, and by the time a patient is diagnosed, the damage is often irreversible. Pfizer, like most companies, had largely pulled back from Alzheimer's research after a series of costly and demoralizing failures. But AI is providing a new lens by analyzing longitudinal data from thousands of patients, their genetics, their spinal fluid, their PET scans, their cognitive tests over many years. Machine learning models are beginning to detect the earliest whispers of the disease. They are identifying subtle patterns that predict who will develop Alzheimer's years before they show any clinical signs. This is the prerequisite for prevention. If you can identify the people who are on the path to disease, you can intervene early, potentially with drugs that are far more effective than anything we have now. It also helps untangle the biology. The old theories focused almost exclusively on the amyloid plaques that build up in the brain, but the AI, looking at the data without preconceptions, is pointing to other pathways, other proteins, other systems that may be equally important. It's opening up new avenues for drug discovery in a field that had become a graveyard of failed hopes. The road ahead is still long and uncertain. The first generation of AI-discovered drugs is only now entering late stage clinical trials. Many will fail. They will fail because animal models don't perfectly predict human outcomes. They will fail because biology is infinitely complex, and our models, no matter how sophisticated, are still just shadows on the wall of the cave. But each failure will be a new data point. It will be fed back into the machine, and the machine will learn. The models will get better, not just at predicting success, but at predicting the specific ways in which a drug might fail. The cost of failure will go down, and the cost of success will follow. Pfizer's journey with AI is not a story about a company that found a magic button. It's a story about a company that realized it was sitting on a mountain of data and decided to learn how to mine it. It's a story about the awkward, sometimes difficult marriage between the culture of the laboratory bench and the culture of the server rack. The scientists had to learn to trust the algorithm, and the algorithm had to learn to speak the scientist's language. The result is a new kind of research and development, one that is faster, smarter, and more ambitious. The ultimate prize is not just a few new drugs. The ultimate prize is a fundamental shift in how we understand and treat disease for the first time in history. We have a tool that can see the entire landscape of human biology at once. We are just beginning to learn how to use it. The algorithm is in the lab now, and it's not leaving. The future of medicine will be written by the partnership between the human mind and the machine. And if the story so far is any indication, it's going to be a story of cures we once thought were impossible.